Nazi Culture and Soviet Vulture. I am, as always, your host, Christopher Paul Dugdale, MEDMA. We are Duncanville High School in these United States, and today is March the 29th, 2021. And on this date in history, in 1975, the United States withdrew all their troops from Vietnam, ending the Vietnam War. So, anyone who's like, man, I hope the Vietnam War lasts forever, it ended in 1975. So, take that, people. Heinrich Himmler. He was one of Hitler's right-hand men. He was the head of the Schutzstaffel, or SS. He was also in charge of the Gestapo, or secret police. He was in charge of several of the concentration camps that killed over 500,000 Jews. Now, Joseph Goebbels was basically his minister of propaganda, Hitler's minister of propaganda and his right-hand man. He created the image of Hitler as the Messiah, or a Messiah to the German people. They made a film about the rallies at Nuremberg called The Triumph of the Will. And he also led a book burning of anti-Nazi ideas, but anytime there was propaganda to be created, he was really behind it in Germany, and Hitler kept him at his side through his suicide. So Hitler's suicide, not Goebbels. Goebbels' suicide was a couple hours after Hitler killed himself. So Hitler encouraged companies to make really cheap radios. Also put loudspeakers on the streets so that people could listen to his speeches as a community, and so that everyone in the homes could afford a radio to listen to those the speeches whenever they weren't in town. And Kraft durch Freude, or Strength Through Joy, this is something that he does just like the Italians, where they control all the free time of the working class. They have very cheap concerts, operas, films, tours of Germany, sports. He also reinvigorates the country with great Latin music, or not great Latin, great German music. One of his favorites was Wagner. Ernst Jünger makes a movie called The Storm of Steel. And this is about a German officer who is captured. He stresses the virtues of military service and sacrifice in this. And this is to encourage the Germans to... So, Arnold Schoenberg, he is a Viennese artist, and he created this style of music called atonal music, which uses a scale of 12 notes independently of any tonal key. It's very hard to describe this. The only thing I can do is play it for you, and as weird as some of the music sounded before, this one is even more eclectic than that. As you can tell, a very comforting style of music. Hermann Hesse wrote about spiritual loneliness in a mechanized society, and how industrialization was separating people from the work and their product. He also wrote about Damien. This is a psychoanalytic study of incest. Again, fitting with this type of music, I believe. Steppenwolf was another piece written by Hermann Hesse, and this shows the psychological confusion of modern existence. Some of the artwork created during this period was also quite disturbing. German Expressionism focuses on the suffering and shattered lives caused by the war. Uh, you can see one of the images up at the top of a man being torn to pieces, kind of screaming in agony. Uh, and in the bottom side, you see people with gas masks throwing grenades, and basically someone's hallucination or nightmare of what happened in World War One. Now, functionalism in architecture. This is a lot similar to the design made in the United States. Buildings should be stripped of unnecessary ornamentation and functionalism or utilitarianism. You don't put a lot of money into the outside, it's all on the inside on usable space. The Bauhaus School of Art, Architecture, and Design was one of the leading schools in architecture in Weimar, Germany. This is under Walter Gropius, which is a very odd and unfortunate name. They tried to blend painting and sculpture with printing and weaving and furniture making. They designed steel box buildings with rows of windows. Again, no real beauty to what they're designing, just all very utilitarian and kind of boring. You see the image right there on the top left-hand side. Looks about as interesting as the man below it. Now, the Nuremberg laws, these were put in place to try and do to, so the Germans could do whatever they wanted to the Jews. They took citizenship from Jewish Germans. They forbade marriages and sex between Germans and Jews. And if you were a German married to a Jew, you could divorce them and keep everything property-wise for yourself, regardless of your gender. Now, Kristallnacht, or the Night of Shattered Glass, is going to start after a Jew kills an official. So this makes it so you can do whatever you want to the Jews. You can rob them, you can kill them. It doesn't really matter. There's no repercussions as a result. So thousands of Jews died, hundreds were injured, thousands of businesses were destroyed, 180 synagogues were wrecked and looted, and 30,000 Jews were sent to concentration camps. And from this point, for the next few years, before World War II starts, Jews were encouraged to immigrate from Germany. The problem was no one wanted the Jews. The United States sent away several ships full of Jews, and on one of the occasions, the ship will end up coming back to Europe, and everyone on the ship dying in a concentration camp. Well, actually at Auschwitz. Now, at the beginning, Jews were allowed their own culture in private, and but you weren't allowed to have anything to do with the Jews if you were German. Okay? The Jews were evacuated from their homes and forced into the ghettos, and forced to sell their companies for almost nothing as they were moving out. And Germans took advantage of this. Now, Hitler promised to make things better, and as he's rounding up all these communists and all these Jews, he's taking their homes and all their possessions and giving them to other leading German families. And basically, they start a process of upgrading everyone's homes and all of their possessions into better homes and better possessions. And so about 80% of the Germans aren't going to do anything about any of the initial attacks, not because they hated the Jews, but it gave them a chance to get richer and live better. And Hitler used this as the beginning steps of getting rid of the Jews. The truth is, a lot of people will ignore what's going on and out of sight, out of mind. So it was easier to just kind of go along and get along than it was to try and stand up, because you would very often find yourself in the camps with the Jews and other political prisoners. So Nazi leaders are going to meet at the Wannsee Conference to decide the final solution. By the way, it's at this beautiful estate. It's amazing that while they were there, they were still focused on killing off a group of people. The final solution was created at the Wannsee Conference, and they'd round up the Jews and all other undesirables. This would be the Slavs, who were considered inferior, who Hitler wanted to enslave, and you make it easier by rounding up all of their intellectuals. Russian POWs were also killed in this. Gypsies. Gypsies were kind of seen as the best description I could give you today are people that travel in little carnivals. They seem a little bit different, and people accuse them all of being thieves, and you have a very xenophobic world that's afraid of any foreigners. Jehovah's Witnesses were also rounded up, as well as homosexuals, and they put them in concentration camps, and they worked as slave laborers. The elderly, the sick, and the young, when all these people were rounded up, were sent to be killed in extermination camps in gas chambers. And they built these extermination camps inside the concentration camps, but they did most of this in Poland, and part of that was because of the smell of death and cremation. In Auschwitz alone, they got to a point where they could murder and cremate 12,000 people a day. Now, the mass killings started with the Soviet invasion. The invasion of the Soviet Union. And so they had created these mobile killing squads called the Einsatzgruppen. And they machine gunned thousands and thousands of people and burned them in mass graves. You see a picture of them in the top left-hand side. They've got their guns out and trained and ready to fire on the people that are already in the grave. On the picture at the bottom, you have some people on their knees about to be shot in the backs of the heads. Now, despite all of this, during the Roaring '20s, Berlin was the cultural center of Europe. They established all these theaters, cabarets, cinemas, and jazz clubs. And anyone who was anyone living in Europe at the time would flock to these to take in the culture. The first radio broadcast of a concert took place in Berlin, and that was by soprano Nellie Melba in June of 1920. That was the first public broadcast as well. Now, the first public broadcast in the United States wasn't until November of 1920, and that's where they announced that Warren G. Harding was elected president. Now, the first film that was shown in Europe, and so it's the first short film. It was called The Train Arrives at the Station, and it was put together. It was a French film, and it was done by the French Lumiere brothers. Italy had also made a nation called Quo Vadis, and in 1916, D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation was released. And that was a movie about how the KKK saved the South from black people. 40% of Western Europeans went to the movies at least once a week during this time period. And during this burgeoning time where they're creating more and more propaganda, it was easy to use these gatherings that were happening anyway to spread whatever thought that your country was trying to do at the time. And it wasn't just done by Germany and Hitler. England and France do it to a certain extent as well. Now, mass leisure, again, this was a concern of all countries to prevent things like the French Revolution from happening. So, the World Cup was created in 1930, and this was a contest between all the countries in the world that could put together a team and the first World Cup was actually won by Uruguay. To show the greatness of what had been created in Germany, the Olympic Committee awarded the 1936 Olympics to Berlin. So Germany built this massive stadium. It seated 140,000 people, and you have these contests, and so many Germans were winning in 1936. But the greatest slight to them was the fact that Jesse Owens was able to win a gold medal, and Hitler wouldn't put the medal around his neck. He had someone else do that, but he'd been awarding all the other medals to the German people. The Popular Front, which we've talked about earlier, the socialist group in France, this gave all the people a 15-day paid vacation in the summer as a way of getting them to experience the world a little bit more, instead of being at home with nothing to do where they might foment rebellion. So, the Soviet Union, you have war communism. This starts during the Soviet Civil War, the Russian Revolution. Transportation, communication, banks, mines, factories, and businesses over 10 people were nationalized. So if you had any company that had 10 people working for it, they became a part of the Soviet government. Now, there was also a major problem with food. They were trying to force all of the Ukrainians to become farmers and farm much more food than they could. They knew it was going to fail, and they expected millions of Ukrainians to die. And 5 million would die from the famine between 1920 and 1922. The NEP, or New Economic Policy, was put together by Lenin, and this kind of undoes a lot of things that were happening during the Civil War. And it allowed peasants to sell produce, and it allowed industries with less than 20 workers to be owned privately. But this will be a very short-lived development, as once things got under the control of Stalin, they removed all of this. So after Lenin dies, there's a major battle between Trotsky and Stalin. Leon Trotsky thought that he was working with the left, and they thought that the revolution didn't go far enough, that everything should be owned by the people and not by the government, and that the government shouldn't exist. He was the leader of the Red Army and worked hand in hand with Lenin and with Stalin. But once again, Stalin had found a way to take control of the Politburo by appointing 10,000 loyalists of his to key positions. And he expels Trotsky from the Soviet Union in 1927 and has him assassinated in 1940. Once Stalin took over, he put into play his 5-year plan. And this tries to force the Soviet Union to go from agriculture to industrialization in a 5-year period, which is impossible. It fails horribly there. They focused on making capital goods and armaments. Cities were not ready for the massive influx of people. And that happened in the United States as well. And it took 40 years for people in the United States to start to get into better living conditions. And he was going to try and do it for 5. He stressed the need for sacrifice, and like in Germany and Italy, the family was praised. Abortion was illegal, homosexuality was criminalized, and if you were a father that was divorced and you weren't supporting your family or your children, then you were fined as well. Now, there's this story that's kind of made up about a man by the name of Alexei Stakhanov. And Stakhanov was praised because one day he mined 13 times what all the other workers did during a single shift. He was praised throughout Russia, and he became this great folk hero. And although there's no evidence he was able to do anything like that, uh, still, that's kind of things that were praised during this time period, and that was what Stalin was hoping to put together, people that would want to emulate him. Now, as Trotsky's being forced out of the Soviet Union, Stalin begins by eliminating all of Trotsky's former supporters, and also all of the old Bolsheviks, and any people that supported capitalism. So a lot of these were supporters of Lenin and supporters of Trotsky. The Great Terror happened from 1934 to 1938, where 4 million people were arrested with charges against the state, and 800,000 were executed. During his reign, it's estimated that between 50 and 100 million people were killed due to him either directly having them killed or having them starved, or in some cases putting them in positions in World War II where their units would be wiped out when they didn't have any supplies to fight. In fact, it was often that the Soviet officers would stand behind the men that they wanted wiped out, and they'd send them in extremely undersupplied and have machine guns at the back, so they either ran into the enemy machine guns, or if they turned back, ran into the machine guns of the Soviets. Now, I mentioned a little bit about this, and that is the collectivization of agriculture that they did in the Ukraine, but they did in other areas as well. So, the kulaks, or the wealthy farmers, were eliminated and sent to Siberian gulags. You move up to Siberia, the average temperature is somewhere around 15 degrees in the summer. In the winter, we get down sometimes to 40 to 60 below zero. 26 million families were collectivized into 250,000 units. And 2.9 million Ukrainians would die during this forced collectivization of their farms. And as many as 10 million peasants would die because of famines that were created by the Soviet Union to get rid of people that they did not want, that they didn't want part of their country or part of the world anymore. Now, education was there was much more equality in education. They allowed workers, peasants, and young people to receive higher education, and they're really pushing towards engineering. And adult courses also allowed for advancement. In fact, they get so many people educated during this time that once they kidnapped some of the Nazi scientists during World War II, they have enough there to advance their engineering programs to put people in space before the United States, and really causes the United States to panic. And one of the most pivotal things that will happen is whenever they put Sputnik into orbit, and it changed the United States probably as much as anything did in the 20th century. Portugal, which hardly seems to matter, but we'll still mention, they created an authoritarian state under a former finance minister by the name of Antonio Salazar. There was a massive earthquake that destroyed a lot of the country, and he helped rebuild things afterwards. In Eastern Europe, democracy also is going to fail there as well, because there's no tradition of democracy and no support from the middle class. Poland, Hungary, Greece, and Yugoslavia, all relatively new formed nations, created authoritarian regimes in the 20s as well. In the 1930s, Romanian Corneliu Codreanu created a fascist government with a paramilitary squad called the Iron Guard. But as he was trying to take over, they were crushed by King Carol II, who created an authoritarian state of his own once he crushed them. So anyone looking for hope and happiness, this is probably the wrong day for it in this class. In the meantime, I hope that everyone has a great day. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I will see you on the other side. Please don't cocaine, please don't AIDS, and please don't COVID. This is Christopher Paul Dugdale, MEDMA, and I will see you soon. Have a great day, everyone.